It is almost 12:30 here on the East Coast, and that must mean we are here to talk about an AEW pay-per-view. That is indeed the case. I am, of course, your host of these special edition Wrestling Night in America shows following each and every AEW pay-per-view and WWE Premium Live event. We are here tonight, of course, to talk about the 2025 edition of AEW's Revolution. The show just got over a short time ago. It took place at the Crypto.com Arena in Los Angeles, California. Good looking crowd, lots to talk about in this show, 9 matches. And of course, I am not doing this one alone. I have got the incomparable, the former host of this very show, and now frequent and regular co-host for these shows, the one and only Greg Parks. Welcome back to Wrestling Night in America, Greg. How's it going?
It's going good. It's as you said, almost 12:30 on the East Coast. Luckily for me, I have spring break this week, so
perfect.
I know we talked earlier before we went on the air about maybe not going till 3 a.m, but if we did, I wouldn't have as big a problem with it as I normally would because I have tomorrow off.
So you wanna go till 4? You want to push it till 4?
Deep into the evening is how I thought about it.
Or early into the morning, depending on how you...
I could totally see myself logging off here and walking over to Dunkin' Donuts and picking up a coffee.
Yeah, could happen. I hope it doesn't happen because I've still got to do analysis for this show. We know how rapid pace the AEW pay-per-views are, so still got analysis on my end. But we did giving away the topic at hand here. We did talk a little bit before the show about keeping our opinions somewhat brief, only because we do have a third person here to join us, a VIP member, and also my co-host from last week. If you happen to tune in to the post-elimination chamber show, longtime VIP member Sean joined me for that show. We had a great time talking with a whole lot of VIP members in the chat, and also some people someone who attended the show live, and other VIP members as well. It was a really good time, and of course, one of the biggest shows in recent memory, the John Cena heel turn. But that's neither here nor there. Tonight, we're talking about AEW, and helping Greg and I do that, welcome in Sean.
Guys, what's going on? It's good to be on with you again. Greg, I missed you as always, so it's good to be back on with you. And Brandon, we did have a lot of fun talking about last week, but we had a lot of fun talking about this week too, or we will. There's a lot going on tonight. A lot going on.
For sure. And right out of the gate, Dougie Doug in the chat, nothing like losing an hour of sleep and then going past midnight.
Right.
Yes, exactly. So yeah, we're all running on an hour less of sleep. I actually, I had this pegged. I don't know if anybody else noticed or if it's just me because I'm thinking in terms of covering these shows. But I did look and see that we happen to have an AEW pay-per-view lining up with daylight savings time, and I was like, oh man, who decided that was okay? Like, who decided that was a good idea? Thankfully, it was the day before. I'm somewhat adjusted, but not entirely adjusted. We will get through it. So, guys, as usual, certainly welcome your input in the chat. VIP members, you are welcome to comment and call in as well if you'd like to be part of the show. The link, of course, is provided in my pwtorch report for AEW Revolution. You do have to be on the VIP side to see that link. Otherwise, you will see a link to the YouTube show. You're welcome, of course, if you're not a VIP member, to join us and comment in the chat. We will be highlighting several comments throughout the night there. And guys, let's get into it. I want to start with the most recent thing on our mind and something that the chat was talking about right out of the gate. Typically, I do run through these shows chronologically, and I do want to do that after we get through this first thing. But let's go ahead and talk about the main event first. So we have Jon Moxley versus Adam Copeland, or Cope. I'm still not used to calling him that. I don't think that I will call him that. Seems strange to me. But Jon Moxley, Adam Copeland in the main event for the AEW World Championship. Moxley wins this one. It turns into a triple threat match late because Christian Cage makes a surprise return and cashes in the contract that he took hold of way back in August at All In. Moxley ends up winning this one with a bulldog choke on Christian Cage. This one goes quite a while, finishing around just short of 27 minutes.
Oh my gosh. Did it really?
Moxley wins with the bulldog choke. Yeah. 26-32 by my count. Moxley wins over Cage with a bulldog choke. There is a brief moment there where it looks like Cage is going to steal the win and the title by getting 2 fingers across the throat of his former friend Adam Copeland, but it was not to be. Moxley pulls him away into the choke, and we get a pass-out finish to close out the show. Aside from the Swerve Strickland tease, run in at the end, where we're headed for the next feud. Greg, I'll start with you. Thoughts on this main event?
Context is everything. I think if it was a different time and place and this match was not preceded by the 3 matches that came before it, I think it could have been decent. It still was not the AEW style main event that we've become accustomed to. But that being said, I think it was made all the worse by the matches and just the idea that Toni Storm and Mariah May could have, should have, whatever you want to say, gone on last. And it may have had a greater effect instead of having 3 absolutely amazing matches and then having I think I saw somebody in WWE 2015 style main event as the main event of this one. So in that context, it really stood out like a sore thumb and not in a good way. But I just wonder if it hadn't been preceded by those 3 matches, would it be viewed as negatively as it has been across the board? I mean, usually there are some things that are polarizing that happen on AEW pay-per-view. Some people love it. Some people hate it. The general consensus seems to be that this was not a great match. Certainly not up to the standards of usual AEW pay-per-view main events. Now, all of that being said, I think there is excitement on 2 fronts here. The Christian Cage cash-in is now over. I think that was something people were kind of expecting coming into this match. And I think it's been kind of a cloud hanging over the world title scene. Now that Cage cashed in and lost, we can all kind of move on from that because I don't necessarily think that's been a great storytelling tool in AEW. And also there's excitement over Swerve Strickland being the next challenger for Jon Moxley and the attack that Strickland had on Moxley to end the show on a more positive note than the match itself. I really love, and I know we'll talk about it later, this was kind of a real make good pay-per-view for Swerve Strickland. People had been worried about how he was being booked after he lost the AEW title. And with such a big victory earlier on in the show against Ricochet, and then getting to one-up Jon Moxley on the way out as the show ended, things are really looking up for Swerve. And he seems to be a pick of a lot of AEW fans to be the guy who should dethrone Jon Moxley in the name of AEW or whatever.
Yeah, I coming out of the gate, Greg, my thoughts are similar to yours. I as I watched this match unfold and as the finish came and went, my first thought, really, just quite honestly, was dud, just total dud. And I thought that, especially on a card where you are up and down presenting the level of great wrestling that you did, the level of violence that you did in a lot of these matches. And when you had a tailor-made story in Toni Storm and Mariah May, like you said, that really could have and should have main evented this show, knowing what we ended up getting in the main event just made it all that more disappointing. I just thought that, if you are at the level now where stuff on the pre-show is getting bigger, stronger reactions than your main event world title program, then it's time to do a top-down assessment of where you're going with the booking. Because
are you suggesting Big Boom AJ for a future AEW pay-per-view main event?
Perhaps. I mean, at this rate, with what we're getting out of Jon Moxley and the Death Rider story, I'm amazed that month in and month out we continue to see when it has become increasingly clear that the crowd is not into this. They are not into this. This has been 3 pay-per-view main events in a row now where the crowd dies a slow, audible death in the main event because they do not care about this Death Rider storyline. It is not giving them what they are interested in. And there's so much else on the card, top to bottom, that is getting over in a big way, that is working at a significant level. And this is just not. And I feel bad. I think that Moxley is excellent at what he does. I'm intrigued by the heel character. I think Adam Copeland is getting good reactions as a babyface and a potential challenger for a world title, but not in this context. It just isn't working. And I thought that they acknowledged that by closing the show out with the Swerve Strickland run-in to basically save their main event, because it finished with such a dud that they felt like they needed something else to send the crowd home happy, when in reality they could have just put a match that was actually over at the top of the card and it would have served a significantly larger purpose. I don't think we're talking about this match in such a negative context if it's on the undercard where it belonged. Sean, what were your thoughts on this one? And then we can continue on with the show.
Yeah. So Greg, what you said about the 3 matches preceding it, especially having Fletcher Osprey precede it. Come on, man! Like, you're doing all that in that match. There's no way you can make up for it with this match. There's no way. They were looked like they were just doing random, just little moves out there, and it was like, geez. And when the crowd's not invested, but I thought it wasn't good all around. The only good thing about it was we got to where we wanted to go, is where Swerve is going up against Moxley. That's about the best thing I can say for it, really. The ref bump I just thought was awful. I thought Jay White coming out, is he going to turn on Copeland? Is he not? Hits Copeland accidentally. That was all just weird. Yuta all of a sudden swerving. He's back with Mox all of a sudden. That was out of nowhere. Just felt weird. Didn't need to be there. And then the Christian stuff, I'm glad it's gone, but it just.
But anyway, so yeah, I just thought overall it wasn't very, very good. And Tony Mariah should have been the main event of this show. I mean, it was for a world title. I don't know why it wasn't. I thought that was the big mistake that Tony made tonight overall. So I just wasn't a fan of anything they did really here.
Yeah, Rude Dog in the comments saying Excalibur said the crowd is stunned in silence. And I picked up on that as well. The announcers were really, really trying to sell the lack of reaction from the crowd as being because they were somehow stunned by the action. But it's really hard to sell that with a straight face when the crowd has just seen 2 guys nearly kill each other 20 minutes prior in a steel cage. I mean, when you've seen the level of depravity and blood and weapons and blood loss in the Kyle Fletcher and Will Osprey match, you can't seriously sell the notion that Copeland and Moxley elbowing each other to their knees is putting the crowd in a trance or stunned silence. They're silent because they don't care, and because this angle hasn't delivered on any level. I mean, credit to Excalibur for trying, but it's easy to see through. Greg, I think you hit it when you said it felt in a lot of ways, or you attribute it to someone, I'm not sure, but it felt in a lot of ways like a 2015 style WWE main event, just interference for the sake of interference and ref bumps and swerves. They did the stupid thing that that companies are relying way too heavily on right now, where you have Wheeler Yuta come in and he teases like he's going to attack Jon Moxley, but of course it's just a swerve and he's going to hit Copeland. WWE did the same thing last week with Jade Cargill. She looks like she's going to hit Liv Morgan. She turns and she hits Naomi. Like, this has been a thing that's been happening in both companies for a while now, and I do wish they would get away from it. But in any case, I think, realistically, this is the most negative I'm going to be about the whole show, and that's kind of why I wanted to get it out of the way first, because I think the rest of this show was really strong. Greg, Sean, anything either of you guys want to add else about the main event before we run down this thing in chronological order? And of course, chat may lead us back to this along the way. But Greg, you first.
Just the idea that, Jon Moxley as world champion in the main event, we've seen that Tony Khan is a little bit of a traditionalist when it comes to this, that he likes to have his world titles in main events, except for really extenuating circumstances. So, but as you mentioned, Toni Storm and Mariah May is a world championship, right? It's the AEW Women's World Championship. Yep. So it should have at least been in the conversation for taking place last. I do wonder if, Swerve coming out and announcing himself as the challenger by stomping Jon Moxley in the crowd, that might have been the visual that they wanted to end on. But unfortunately, it took almost 30 minutes of so-so match to get there. So then you have to weigh it. Is that worth it to end the show that way when you ask the crowd to sit through 30 minutes of Moxley Copeland that can't possibly live up to the standard that you've set in the previous 3 matches? Could you have done that same swerve stomp if this match was switched with Storm versus Mariah May? That may have played a part as well. So that, as well as this being the world title, which traditionally has gone on last on pay-per-views, both may have played a part in, in the decision of what to put on last that could have carried some weight for Tony Khan.
Yeah. Sean, anything you want to add about this one before we move on?
No, just as far as, some people wanted Christian to cash in and I didn't, because number one, I've already seen Swerve and Christian before. I don't need to see it again. And two, I just Swerve, even though this storyline's been very poorly done for most of it, I think the fans are obviously going to get behind Swerve. And I think that's big for Swerve right now, because I thought he was just kind of in a holding pattern for a while, and this can get him, I think, heated back up, which I think will be, like you said, very good for him. So I think that's a good spot for him to be in.
Yeah, I do think having a challenger that the fans actually think has a good shot at unseating Moxley, and who I think is a really good representation of the whole, bearing the AEW flag, so to speak, is good. And if there's any hope of redeeming this angle, putting Moxley opposite of someone like Swerve is one way to attempt to do that. All right, let's go ahead and start from the top of the show. We'll work our way down through in chronological order. Show kicks off with a lot of fireworks, a good wide shot of the Crypto.com arena in LA, and we know, of course, AEW has struggled with packing crowds in these larger buildings lately. They've transitioned to smaller buildings for TV tapings, which I think has been all around a positive development. And it has led to the buildings looking fuller, sounding fuller, just much better atmosphere on the TV shows. So I was curious to see how things translated back to the larger setting for pay-per-views, and it looked good. I mean, they looked like they had a sizable crowd in LA. That's a very famous arena. It's recognizable on site. And I thought it was good to have them in a big venue like that WWE frequently runs, to send a message that they're still here, they're still hanging in here as a top promotion, and when the lights are on bright, they can still fill a venue of this size. So that was all good, and crowd was hot through the vast majority of this show, I think, with the exception of the main event for the most part. They started out really hot for this opener. MJF and Hangman Adam Page kicked the show off. MJF was out of the curtain first after teasing Hangman's old theme song, and then MJF ends up coming out to a chorus of boos. Hangman comes out, big reaction. They have what I thought was a really good match. Hangman Adam Page wins this one in just under 19 minutes after a buckshot lariat. They told a really fascinating story with this, which is, has been part of the story leading into the pay-per-view, with MJF having such a serious problem with Adam Page, because despite the fact that both of them are sort of irredeemable characters that do these dastardly awful things, the fans are still enamored with Hangman Adam Page. And that came out in the course of this match, with Max, screaming at Page at times, saying, why not me? Why is it you? Why not me? Why do they love you? And I thought the announcers did a really good job here pointing out MJF's insecurity about that, and the fact that, Hangman can be so dastardly and still get the fans to cheer him. Thought it was a smart and effective way to, sort of officially solidify Hangman Page back in this babyface role, despite the lack of any real change from his character. Thought that it was 2 stars working a really high quality match. I thought it was a great opener, really good way to kick off the show. Sean, I'll throw to you first on this one.
It's funny. I was talking to you guys beforehand, and I think I did miss like half this match. I got home a little bit later than I was wanting to, and it was funny.
Oh, Sean, well, now I got to kick you out.
I know. But it was funny because I wanted to. I was like, man, they're gonna do this match first, and of course they started with this match. And I was like, oh man. But I saw the second half of the match, so I missed some of the commentary before, which you kind of brought it up. I liked that they did that. That's one good thing about this story that I've kind of liked about MJF is, he tells the fans he doesn't care, but obviously he does, and it really hurts him that they're cheering Hangman for all the stuff he's doing. So I like that they've been going to that. That's the one part of the story I've really enjoyed. The match, from what I saw, the second half of the match was really, really well done. Like Hangman trying to go for the lariat, and MJF's like doing everything he can to stay away from it. And I think the pile driver or the tombstone on the chair outside was the interesting spot that I don't think they've done. So that was kind of a cool. Even though I think they do the power driver, way too much, and I think, it's a little overdone at certain times. But I thought the match was really good from what I saw. And Hangman, I really liked that they actually put him over here. I thought they could have easily gone with MJF and just, now that they still keep this feud going. There's a way they can do that, of course. But I thought Hangman needed a big win here. I feel like the fans are behind him. They want him to go to the next level, and I think this is a way to do that. Even if they go with this feud a little longer, I think this will help him ultimately. So I thought the match was pretty well done from what I saw, and this is a good start for if they're going to keep it or if they move Hangman on somewhere else.
Yeah, Greg, how about you?
The storyline of Adam Page getting cheered by the fans and MJF being jealous, or whatever interpretation that is kind of strange to me, because yes, they're both dastardly in their own ways, and in MJF's mind, the crowd has picked Adam Page over him. Mm-hmm. But also, MJF also attacks the crowd verbally in ways that Adam Page doesn't. I mean, Adam Page will attack his opponents and, burn their houses down, but he's not going after the fans. He's not verbally attacking the fans. He's not calling them fat boys, and he's not insulting their hometown. That's exactly what MJF does. So it's kind of strange to me that MJF doesn't understand, and maybe that's part of the story that I'm missing. But if they're telling this story of, hey, these are 2 really bad guys, but the fans just happen to choose, well, they didn't just happen to choose Adam Page. He's the guy who's not insulting them every week. So it's kind of weird. If that's the story they're telling there. I thought the match was really strong. I expected in this one and Swerve versus Ricochet both felt like grudge matches in a way. And I was surprised that both matches kind of held back a little bit on that. And I wasn't sure if that's because maybe we're getting a rematch down the line with a couple of those. But then later on in the show, when you see Toni Storm versus Mariah May, when you see Will Osprey versus Kyle Fletcher, and the level of violence that those 2 matches featured, you could understand why they didn't go to that degree
Yeah.
in the matches earlier on the show. So I kind of, put that complaint in my back pocket and I said, okay, I get it now. But I agree. Paige needed the win. I thought it was a really strong win, a really good win for Adam Page. And if it wasn't for Swerve Strickland, I think Adam Page would be my pick to unseat Jon Moxley, to face him next and to go against him. Because I really think there's an interesting story there with Jon Moxley wanting to turn AEW into his image, and really Adam Page being kind of, an AEW hometown guy, but also being what Jon Moxley thinks AEW should be, right?
Yeah.
I mean, he is a guy who in some ways doesn't have a conscience in some of the things that he does. So I think there's a really interesting story there, but I also can't argue with Swerve Strickland being the guy. I think that is the right move. But then you look at Adam Page. Okay, where does this big win over MJF springboard him, if not to a title match? Which, beating a guy the caliber of MJF, you would think 9 times out of 10 should springboard you into that main event scene. So I am curious as to what the next step up the ladder now is for Adam Page after beating MJF the way he did tonight.
Yeah, you've got a lot of guys, and that's a I guess it's a good problem to have in a way, that are poised to be thrust into that main event scene. You have certainly Hangman Adam Page, who is deserving of a title shot at this point. I would even argue, to your point, Greg, he may even be a stronger representative at this point of what AEW stands for, being that homegrown original. And the fact that, too, we can't forget that Swerve, they've done a really nice job rebuilding Swerve in his route to this moment, but it wasn't all that long ago that he was losing to Bobby Lashley in like 8 minutes on pay-per-view. So,
yeah,
right.
And I hope that's part of the full circle that they tell heading into his eventual match with Moxley.
I do too. I'm a little worried that they're just going to gloss over it, because they've kind of moved them both in very different directions. But I do hope that they touch on that, because I mean, if you look at it, if you just look at the two trajectories, I think it'd be pretty easy to argue that Page has a stronger case, if not for the fact that they just set up a number 1 contenders match between Strickland and Ricochet. But I do think that Page is in a good spot right now. I do think that they have done a good job giving you a plausible explanation as to why it's okay. Well, not necessarily okay to cheer Hangman Page again, but instead of just having Page turn without any real explanation, it's been made more or less clear that Page hasn't changed. His demeanor hasn't changed. He's just getting into brawls and fights with guys who the crowd naturally likes him more. And so I am fine with the lack of definition of his character when it's presented in a sensible way like this. And I hope that they continue down that path and make that connection stronger as they go. And I think that they will. I think they found a good spot here with Page. Anything else either of you want to add about this one before we continue on?
No, I'm good.
All right, so match number 2, we have TBS Championship match, Mercedes Monae defending against Momo Wanatabe. I definitely just botched that last name. How do I pronounce it again? Either
Wanatabe.
Watanabe. Okay. So Momo Watanabe, TBS Championship match. Monae retains this one in just over 18 minutes. Good back and forth match. She, after funny note here, the announcers are selling the idea that Momo has for sure put this thing away. That Mercedes is down for the count, and then not even 20 seconds later, Mercedes finishes her off. So Monae hits the moneymaker finisher, and then her crossface submission for a tap out win. Again, just over 18 minutes on this one. Good match. I didn't feel like Momo was set up as a super strong challenger going in. That's often the case with these undercard women's feuds. But she was a suitable challenger. I mean, they told the story that Momo had gotten a hard-earned victory against Serena Deeb the night prior on Revolution. They sold the idea, Taz did, coming into the match, that he thought that Mercedes was a little nervous about this title defense. They talked a lot about the fact that Mercedes had beat her the first time around. This was a rematch. and everyone felt like Momo was better equipped to defeat Mercedes this time around. But all for naught in the end, Monae retaining her championship. Greg, what you think about this one?
I thought the crowd heat was good for a match that I can't imagine anyone really thought Momo Watanabe was going to beat Mercedes Monae here.
Yeah.
And that's unfortunate because there are a lot of really strong women in AEW and a lot of women who could have been in this pay-per-view spot against Monae who could have spent a month or two building up the story that leads to the eventual match. And instead you had Watanabe winning at Wrestle Dynasty in January. She doesn't appear on AEW TV until she gets a win the week prior or the day prior against Serena Deeb. So I'm just, it was an excellent match. And I think everybody expected it to be. But I really would have liked to have had a little more story here. And I'm not one of those guys who is saying, hey, AEW, they don't tell stories. Obviously they do. And obviously there was a story behind this one with her winning at Wrestle Dynasty and things like that. But, when you compare it to some of the other stories on the show, it stands out and not in a great way. But Mercedes Monae, she's had a couple of these matches like this where the challengers just kind of pop out and she vanquishes them. And it does make her stronger in some ways. But I would like to see them get back to being more AEW focused in where her opposition comes from, because I think you could tell deeper and more dense stories that way.
Yeah, to me, a lot of what Monae has been doing is not unlike the way that they were booking Bryan Danielson when he was sort of floundering around in the mid-card for a while and just wrestling people he wanted to wrestle. And there wasn't much heat for the matches. The matches were all good, but they were more or less meaningless. And sometimes it feels like that's what's going on with Monae here, that she has sort of a list of people she wants to work with. And because there's a great deal of respect for her and reverence for her, they're just allowing that to happen. I'm not saying for sure that that's what is occurring here. It just feels similar. It feels in a similar vein to that. I'm with you, Greg. I would really like to see them get back to just focused storytelling. I think Monae had one of my favorite matches of the year last year with Chris Statlander, and we know what she's capable of. We know what she can do against the right opponent with a story that is well built. And I wish that they would get back to that. And it doesn't feel like they're looking down the road and have a single major challenger in mind for her. Maybe it's Jamie Hayter when she's back into the fold full time. I know she's dealing with some visa issues right now, but she seems like someone who could be built into a major threat and a big feud for Monae, but I'm just not sure. Sean, take it away on this one and where you think Monae could potentially go after this.
Yeah, so there's a couple things kind of leaning on what you guys were saying. To me, if you're not, I know Tony wants to have these long pay-per-views. If you're going to pay this much to get them, I know he wants to just give you all the bang for your buck and all that kind of nonsense. That's all good and well. To me, if you're not going to tell a really good story going into a match, or really none, we don't need the match on the pay-per-view. I'm a Mercedes fan. I like her a lot. I think she's gotten better as AEW's gone along, as she's been there, as she's kind of warming up to her heel role more and more. But I know she's going to have a good match. It doesn't need to be on the pay-per-view. Don't take away from these other really good matches when you're just like, oh, well, we're just going to get her on there to have a title defense, which nobody thinks she's losing. No one. There's no reason this match had to go 18 minutes. It was a really, really good match. You can cut it in half, and it's still a really, really fun match. You get what you're getting out of it. Momo's offense, I did think, was hard hitting. It was good. Again, I'm with you. I thought it was a fun match, but 18 minutes is just way too long when there's no story and there's no investment. I would just say, my personal opinion, I wouldn't have it on the pay-per-view. It doesn't need to be there if there's no investment and no story. It doesn't need to be on there for me. So that's my thought on it.
I mean, clearly AEW believes Mercedes Monae is the biggest star of the division. Just the way that they've treated her and the way they've featured her consistently on pay-per-view. And the reality is they're paying her a very large sum of money. And perhaps they feel obligated. Tony Khan feels obligated to put her on pay-per-view. And you'll notice, I mean, they're not just putting her on pay-per-view. Every one of her matches, doesn't matter the opponent, they're going nearly 20 minutes, which is not something we always see out of women's matches in AEW. You don't see a lot of other women's matches do that. Even Toni Storm versus Mariah May didn't get to 13 minutes.
I'm going to talk about that. Yep.
And that is, I mean, that is the storyline of the year in AEW. So it's the being on pay-per-view frequently, but not just that, but getting the opportunity to wrestle so much longer matches than a lot of her contemporaries in AEW. It's easy to say, hey, maybe a Collision main event would have sufficed for this match. And I wouldn't have argued with that. I wouldn't have batted an eye if you put it on there. But clearly AEW believes that she is A, big star, and B, worthy of not only being featured on pay-per-view, but also being featured for longer than any of the other women that are on the roster.
Yeah, I think this is one of those deals where I'm always going to advocate for a star as big as Monae being included in your pay-per-views, especially one where it really feels like Revolution has maybe sort of supplanted Double or Nothing as the number 2 show. I mean, the way that they hyped tonight's event, the way that they hyped last year's, it being Sting's retirement and everything, one of the higher reviewed AEW pay-per-views ever. Revolution has really become a really big mainstay for them. And I think that there was probably a strong desire to make sure that Monae made the card. And I get that. I think my argument would have been, and Sean, you probably agree with this notion too. Like if you're placating to the idea that Monae is going to be on the pay-per-view, just do a better job. Just do a better job building to this moment, because they had a good match and it could have meant a lot more if Momo was more heavily featured on TV. I mean, the 2 times that we saw Momo, aside, there was the match with Deeb last night on Collision, but her appearances on Dynamite were largely relegated to backstage segments that also involved Billy Starks. And Starks was involved in tonight's match too, watching from a skybox. And so they're obviously teasing something there, developing with Monae, but Starks to me doesn't feel like a character that's ready for prime time in a major feud with Monae. It feels closer to something that you do on Dynamite at some point, which will be fine. But yeah, I would just like to see a stronger focus on these programs that they've got Monae in, because she is a big star. She is, moving, doing numbers for them. And I would think that you would want to pay more mind to the feuds that you're getting her involved in. All right, moving on to match 3 on the card, which was the number 1 contenders match between Swerve Strickland and Ricochet. Not to bury the lead here, of course, we already know how this one wrapped up because of Swerve Strickland's involvement later on in the show, but Swerve Strickland does win this one in just over 18 minutes after a couple of house calls in the ring late in the match, and then a kick out from Ricochet. Strickland pulls Ricochet into big pressure for a cover and 3 count. This one involves some tease of dissension between Prince Nana and Swerve Strickland. Nana actually leaves ringside at one point after Swerve shoves him down in a frustrating moment at ringside with Ricochet. Really good match here. I thought, again, these two have had a series of some really strong matches. I've been an advocate for the heel work that Ricochet has done in AEW so far. I think that there's a lot of times you can point to wrestlers who have transitioned from WWE to AEW and have quickly gotten lost in the shuffle, or we have realized pretty early on that the ceiling was the ceiling and that WWE wasn't far off in what their projections were for a particular character. But Ricochet has really surprised me. I mean, he went from a guy who I thought coming in was going to very easily get lost in the shuffle once he merged into traffic. There's just so many guys on the roster that can do what he does, and he doesn't stand out in AEW the way that he did in WWE. But they have really taken that idea and flipped it on its head by giving him this super annoying but effective heel character. The laugh that he does is grating. He was a great foil for Swerve Strickland, and a really good match, a third in their trilogy here tonight that I thought went over really, really well. Swerve is the right guy to win. Only other thing I wanted to mention here before I toss it to you guys is I appreciate AEW's willingness to do some cool things entrance-wise with a lot of wrestlers. They tried it tonight with Swerve Strickland, having a live drummer. Unfortunately, the way that the audio was bouncing off the walls of the arena, everything got desynced. And so the drums were not in sync with Swerve's theme, and it just sounded like a complete and total mess. Commentary was trying to cover it up by talking over it. It was loud and bombastic, and something that probably in the arena sounded really cool, but did not work on TV. So, Sean, I'll throw to you first. Go ahead and talk about the match here.
Yeah, so I'm with you. I thought the match was really, really fun. I did. It was very crisp, very just the moves were very smooth. I thought everything went. I've never been a fan of his Swerve Stomp. I've never really enjoyed that move. I don't know why. It's not I guess a babyface move to me, but he makes it work. I mean, I'll give him that. But I've never been a big fan of that in general. But the Nana dissension stuff, I don't know if I really loved it. I guess in the middle, when he's coming over and Swerve just shoves him, I was like, okay, we're going a little heavy-handed with this. Now we knew Nana was obviously. I told him going into the match, if you lose, there might be a chance I'm not going to stay with you because I'm just tired of you, getting in. So I get where they were going with that. I still didn't really love it, but it was. And then after the match, he comes back out or trying to get the robe, like, they're fighting for the robe, and then Swerve kind of gets the advantage and does end up winning, and then Nana and Swerve have the celebration, which I really thought was a cool moment to end that match on. Just to have them, knowing there's no initial dissension again right now. I thought that was a good ending to the thing. And so Swerve, I just think, is in a good spot. I thought the match was really well done. Ricochet is really doing a good job. As a face, I was with everyone. I thought he was going to merge right in because of just the style he has. Everybody wrestles the same kind of match in AEW. But as a heel, he's just, so far, he's making it work. It's a work in progress, but a good one. So I thought overall I was really excited, other than the Nana stuff in the middle. I thought it was really well done. Really, really good story all around.
Yeah, the Nana thing was a little odd at the onset because it felt like Nana's reaction was a little overblown. You could tell Swerve in the heat of the moment, he just got kicked by Ricochet, and the match to that point had not been going his way, and so in frustration, when he's attacking Ricochet, Nana is like pulling him away. And you can see where in the heat of the moment, a competitor at that level would be frustrated and would shove the person trying to pull them away down. So I thought it seemed on the surface like Nana's reaction was a little overblown, but then I kind of thought about it, and it's like they're already at odds because of over the robe and everything, and so there's frustration building there on both sides. Nana gets pissed, stomps away, throws a fit, leaves, and then eventually cooler heads prevail. I thought that was, you kind of had to do had to work out some of the logic yourself as it was progressing. But I thought that it was a logical step in the story between these two. And it made sense that Nana would overreact, then realize that he overreacted, and come out and finish things as they should have gone. Greg, what did you think of the match and the dissension there with Nana?
Well, I did my mea culpa on Ricochet a week and a half ago when I was on the flagship with Wade Keller. I was very much of the same mind of you guys, that not only did I worry that Ricochet coming to AEW would get lost in the shuffle, but even as recently as a few months ago when he was transitioning to this heel character and getting blown off by the Hurt Syndicate, I was thinking, oh my God, what are they doing? Like, I just did not understand. Mm-hmm. I wrote a Parks' take on pwtorch.com saying as much. And then, I was proven incorrect. And this heel character with the big glasses and just the way he dresses, the laugh, it all comes together. It's a total package. And I mean, I didn't really know he had it in them. I mean, he seemed just like a solid baby face, and you didn't really see that heel character in him in all those years in WWE. So it's been really interesting to see him come out of that babyface shell as a heel in AEW. For much of the show, this was my favorite match. I think it was probably bested by Toni Storm versus Mariah May, but there were a lot of really good matches on the show. But I think Swerve and Ricochet was, if not my favorite, then my second favorite after the women's match. So yeah, I thought it was really strong. And again, I'm not a fan of Prince Nana, generally speaking, but I've found his work more tolerable of late in this whole Swerve Strickland, Prince Nana disagreement storyline that's come about. And obviously with Swerve now going and becoming number one contender and facing Jon Moxley, they really needed to put Nana and Swerve back together. They really needed to make a cohesive unit out of the two again. There's a tiny fly on my microphone, so he may have some comments too about Revolution tonight. If he interrupts, I'll just let him go. But no, I thought that this was again a big step in the right direction for rehabbing Swerve, and hopefully, as I said earlier, he's the guy to take the title from Moxley. I think he is the right choice right now to do that. Getting drawn in, it will be interesting to see what happens to him getting drawn into the Death Rider stuff, which you guys have criticized certainly, and I've not been a huge fan of it. I thought it had a lot of promise at first, and I think as the weeks go by, it just seems to lose a lot of the luster that it once had. But it'll be interesting to see how he ingratiates himself into that Death Rider storyline, and if the Death Riders stink, just kind of sucks Swerve down with them, or if he can rise above that.
That's a fair point.
I've been worried about that too, because everybody that, not that anyone coming out of it has necessarily been totally worse for wear, but it has. I don't feel great about the positions of Adam Copeland or Orange Cassidy or Jay White coming out of their feuds with Jon Moxley. I mean, everything seems to be dragged down a peg by their involvement in that angle, and hopefully Swerve is at a place where he is above that. Rude Dog noting that as a drummer, that entrance situation was brutal. It would have been cool. Like the drummer sounded fine. Like it would have been a cool moment, and they just something with the audio, man. That is one thing that WWE just has that edge in production where when they want to pull something like that off, it's going to land. And I hope that eventually AEW gets to that level, because I think that in the production department, they have a lot of cool ideas that just sometimes just don't work, like this one. So match number 4, we are headed on to the AEW Continental Championship. Now, there is a rumor floating around. I don't know how much truth there is to it. I don't know where it originates from, but I saw it, and now I'm going to latch onto it and hope that it is true, that AEW is considering merging the Continental and International Championships before too long. I say that is an incredible, fantastic idea.
Yes.
And I will write a heartfelt letter in praise of Tony Khan if he does that. Please get rid of one of these mid-card championships. I don't care which one you pick. Just please do it. Kazuchika Okada retaining his Continental Championship here in 11 minutes, 42 seconds over Brody King. I thought that this was fine. A perfectly, acceptable lower card title defense for Okada. Brody King is a fun character, a fun opponent. This didn't have a ton of heat behind it, as these lower card title feuds often lack. Okada was sufficiently. I felt like Okada was sufficiently violent against an opponent whose style is kind of violent by nature. So that was a neat clash of styles, and I thought they worked relatively well together. I thought it was interesting to note that coming into the match, commentary flat out said that Okada looks, acts, and works disinterested in defending the title.
Wow.
But they framed it as him doing it as a means to disrespect his opponent, which I thought was a nice way to frame it. But this is a continued trend of Okada, I think, not living up to expectations, and I don't put that all on him by any stretch. Kyle in the chat saying, if you've never watched New Japan, Okada is no big deal at all. And I think that's the case. AEW is banking on the idea that all of their audience is well-versed with New Japan. And if you're not, if you've only seen a match or two here or there, you have very little to go on Okada. And Okada has largely been a mid-card comedy character in AEW. I think that there is certainly a lot more to do with him than that, but perhaps he is comfortable at this level at this stage of his career. I'm not sure. Greg, thoughts on this match with Brody King and Okada's trajectory in general with AEW?
Yeah, there's something that Dave Meltzer has said about Okada's matches that really kind of is not something that I'd ever thought of before, is that Okada is really at his best in those 20 to 30 minute matches that you get in New Japan. And you're thinking, well, if someone's good in a 20 to 30 minute match, why can't they be good in a 10 to 15 minute match? And, you know, it's that last 10 or so minutes where you're tired and you're telling that story and you're hitting those bursts of energy that, and it's that storytelling that late in the match that he's really good at. So when you limit him to 10 and 15 minutes, he doesn't get to that point that he excels at. So that's, I mean, just throwing that out there. If you disagree, that's fine, but it's something that I hadn't thought of that I read. And I think there is some validity to that. But the other thing you got to remember is Okada's 37 years old. You know, he's not in his late 20s. He's been through a very rigorous New Japan schedule for the last 10, 15 years as a top guy, wrestling in some of the biggest matches in that company. And, you know, he may want to get 10 more years out of his body. And so he can't do that wrestling the way that Will Osprey is doing at his age, or wrestling the way that Kyle Fletcher is doing at his age. So when you're comparing him to them, or even previous versions of Okada, it's going to look a little like he's dialing it back.
It's the Nakamura story.
Very
Different
much
company,
so.
Same deal.
Yeah. And that's a comparison you do hear every once in a while. So that's my thing on Okada. Brody King, I'm really high on him right now. I think in the Continental Classic the last 2 years, he's really impressed me. Now that he's able to get out of the shadow of Malachi Black, now that he is gone, I'm really looking for Brody King to make that jump as a singles wrestler, and I'm hoping that he does. I posted this on social media at Greg M. Parks. I was posting during the show on both Blue Sky and X that there's nobody like Brody King at the top of the AEW card. There's nobody with his size that can do the things that he can do in the ring. In terms of just that size, speed, flying ability combination. There's nobody like that at the top of the card. So I would like to see him utilized there. I know that there's only so many main event slots to go around. And right now, AEW is top heavy in that regard with your Ospreys, your Omegas, your Moxleys, your Copes. I mean, all of these guys, your Jay Whites, he's going to be ahead of him on the totem pole as well. But I would like to see a little bit more for Brody King moving forward.
The cool thing about Brody King is he is really the antithesis of the aesthetic appearance of the prototypical AEW wrestler, but he can wrestle like the prototypical AEW wrestler, which really sets him apart because he is a guy who can have the physical, incredibly intimidating presence that some of the other top guys just can't because of their lack of size, but he can still go with those guys at the same level where they don't need to create movement for him or work him in a different way, the way that you would like a large guy like Braun Strowman, for example, in WWE. It's a totally different animal. You're still
or even a guy
to,
like Will Hobbs that we've seen sort of
yeah,
dance around the main events in AEW.
Mm-hmm.
Hobbs is that big guy, but he doesn't have the flying ability that Brody King does, the agility that Brody King does.
Yeah.
And so there's even a difference there.
Yeah. And there's a natural, Kyle had mentioned this too in the chat, the alternative looking style.
Yeah.
I mean, there's a natural cool factor to Brody King. I mean, he's a hardcore kid at heart.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I know I have friends who are involved in the hardcore music scene who know Brody King and have played shows with Brody King. He's also he's in a hardcore band. And that's him. That's not a character. That's just who Brody King is. And I think that there's a certain authenticity to that,
yes,
that people really like and can tap into, and they've got something there if they want to run with it. Sean, thoughts on the match? Anything about Brody King and Okada that you want to add?
Yeah, I'm definitely with you guys on Brody King. The more I've seen him, the more I've really enjoyed his look, his movement in the ring. I do think he's really, really talented. I do think they need to do more with him. As far as the match, I kind of make the same argument I did for Mercedes. I know Okada's a big star, or they're claiming him to be a big star, even though I didn't watch New Japan. I know he's 37, Greg. That's a good point, but I didn't know him when he wrestled all these matches. I didn't see him. And AEW's putting him in there again, like we've seen everything he's done, and I didn't. So in AEW, he just looks like another guy to me. He's just another guy having a match that had no build. I mean, there was like a match here or there, and they did, they interacted, but there wasn't really a build to this match. I'm like, if you're going to do it, I'm glad it was only 11 minutes, but I still wouldn't have it on the pay-per-view. It just felt meaningless to me. I knew Okada was winning, and during the match, what was kind of bugging to me was I did like that, in the sense of Brody got a lot of offense in, because I thought Brody took most of the match, to be honest with you. I didn't think Okada hardly got any offense in until the very end of the match. And he does, and that's the thing about AEW matches that are hard for me sometimes. You have all these moves that Brody's doing to Okada, and then it ends up not even affecting him. And he hits him with like 2 moves in the Rainmaker, which I'm not a fan of the Rainmaker from what I've seen. It works on smaller guys. It works in certain instances. Like you said, Greg, they probably build up to that spot a lot better in certain matches. It just didn't look good to me. I was like, Brody's losing to this when he's been dominating the whole match. It took me out of it a little bit. I was like, I just don't get that. So the finish kind of fell flat for me, and it was just, it was there. It was fine for what it was. It was hard hitting. It was physical, but Okada, again, I just want them to do more with him. And if they're going to have eventually leading to him and Omega somewhere down the line, I'm all for it. But so far, I haven't been impressed with anything I've really seen from Okada yet.
Yeah, I was glad that they kept this on the shorter side because, Sean, to your point, it didn't have a lot of build, and it has been within AEW's purview in the past to just, regardless of how many matches they've got on the card and where they're placed and how well they've been built, you're not seeing much of anything run under 15 minutes. They're just going to give you at least 15, sometimes closer to 20, and you're going to get that up and down the card. And I thought they showed some restraint here with this one, and that's a good segue into the next match, the AEW World Tag Team title match. Bobby Lashley and Shelton Benjamin with MVP, the Hurt Syndicate, defending against the Outrunners, Truth Magnum and Turbo Floyd. This one only going just under 9 minutes, about 8 minutes and 40 seconds. The Hurt Syndicate win and retain the AEW tag team titles. Shortest match of the night by at least several minutes, along with the one prior to this one. This was in an interesting spot on this pay-per-view because it is very unlike AEW to book such a dominant win. And I thought it was daring in a way because the Outrunners have gotten over to a pretty significant degree. It's a fun act. It's a cool act. I mean, I think that it delves a little bit into the comedic territory, but it's endearing just enough for me to be on board with it. They did feel like, colossal underdogs against the Hurt Syndicate. The Hurt Syndicate are playing this cool role right now. The crowd likes to chant along to their theme. They're also booked in a way that no one has really been booked in AEW before, except for maybe, the early days of Malachi Black, where they are just dominating opponents and putting them down. And that's what we saw here. I mean, Magnum and Floyd had a bit of offense throughout the course of this thing, but by and large, this was Lashley and Benjamin just dominating and overwhelming their opponents, hitting big moves, hitting their finishers, and getting out with the tag team titles. Sean, I'll start with you. What did you think about this? And what did you think about how they've handled the Hurt Syndicate so far?
Well, let's go with the Hurt Syndicate, I guess, so far. I mean, overall, I've liked what they've done with them. I was curious of how they were going to book it, how close to the way WWE was doing it that they would. And so it's been kind of the same, but it's still been a good thing. I mean, they're built like badasses, and that's what I've wanted to see from that. So, like, that's been good. I'm not with you. I don't like the Outrunners at all. I just, it's a comedic, stupid act that just doesn't need to be in AEW. I don't get a kick out of it at all. I know some people do, and that's your cup of tea, and I'm not going to doubt anybody thinks it's fun and that's cool. I just don't. They were no threat to them at all. They're not good in the ring at all. They are not good, guys, at all. I mean, this should not have lasted more than 5 minutes. It was too long at 9. I mean, they got out quickly at the end, which was good. But again, I just, the tag team division, you have somebody like the Hurt Syndicate that can kind of build it up. And I thought, okay, let's build Cage and Archer, who at least could be a decent tag team to go up against these guys and make you feel credible. Like, oh, there's a chance they could do something. Like, we know they're not going to beat the Hurt Syndicate, but at least there's a chance. The Outrunners, we'll just do this comedic act that is getting over for a certain amount of people, but overall it's not going to go anywhere in AEW. They have a shelf life that's going to wear out really quick. And if they were good in the ring, I could at least see it, but they're not. They're just not good in the ring, and this didn't do anything for me. It was fine for what it was, but I don't need any more of the Outrunners. Move on to someone else, please, soon.
Yeah, I thought that there were some rough moments in this one when the Outrunners were getting a bit of offense in. I thought largely it was set up in a way to highlight the Hurt Syndicate enough that it didn't really get in the way of my enjoyment of just seeing the Hurt Syndicate dominate. But certainly not, this was not a good match in terms of wrestling quality. But I did think it worked well in furthering the mystique and the lore of the Hurt Syndicate. Greg, what say you?
The best way I can put it is the moment seemed too big for the Outrunners. They're fine on TV, but as you mentioned, Brandon, there were some hiccups when they were on offense that you don't usually see out of AEW pay-per-views. I mean, the threshold for match quality is pretty high here. So to see the kind of spots go awry that you saw in this match was unusual for an AEW pay-per-view. And look, I like the Outrunner gimmick, but I don't like it as a challenge for the World Tag Team Championships on pay-per-view. When I was posting on social media, and I'll probably get some backlash for this, but I kind of compare them to the Bushwhackers, right? Like the Bushwhackers had their niche in the WWF. The crowd loved them. The people loved them. They were a wacky comedy duo. But they were never around the tag titles. You never saw them challenging for the tag. They weren't facing Demolition on pay-per-view. They weren't facing the Legion of Doom on pay-per-view. They were kept as a lower card, biting the butts of the Beverly Brothers or whatever the case may be. And so that's the role I see of the Outrunners, not biting anyone's butts necessarily, but in that lower card, keep them on TV, put them on TV every week if you want. But I would like to think that the tag division in AEW is stronger than giving a tag title shot to a clearly comedy tag team like this. In AEW, where the best wrestle, that's the tagline. So I didn't think they lived up to that necessarily in this match.
Yeah, the tag team titles have gone through quite the journey in the last year or so, from once being almost revered in similar fashion to the World Championship to now being a very clearly a lower card title. I mean, I think the Young Bucks, in the characters that they were playing at the time, did a lot of damage to those tag titles, and there just hasn't been a lot of oomph behind anything they've done since then. I think the Hurt Syndicate is a good start because they are treated so seriously and they are booked so well and like badasses, and it's something different than what we're used to seeing in WWE, in AEW. Their style of matches have been different than what we're used to seeing in AEW, and I think that's a net positive all the way around. I just wonder who is going to be a good like meat and potatoes challenger for them, knowing that like to think they were cutting into the crowd tonight and showing Action Andretti and Lio Rush, like that is not a viable feud for the Hurt Syndicate. I'm sorry. Like no, that's a 5-minute squash on Dynamite at best. Like you need a real serious tag team with some actual prowess and history. The Young Bucks are certainly a possibility there, and if they come back as baby faces as we expect, that's sort of that's sort of the best option they have right now. But I'm with Kyle in the chat who just said there's no believable tag team to beat Hurt Syndicate right now. It's going to take some effort to get a team to that point, and it's certainly not going to be Rush and
I do wonder too if they may use this as an opportunity to put two singles wrestlers together as a tag team. We don't see AEW do that very often, certainly not to the extent that WWE has done it at various times in its history. But if they look down the tag team roster and they agree with the premise that there is not a tag team viable enough to really have any believability in knocking off the Hurt Syndicate, you could easily find two singles wrestlers who are being underutilized and put them together, and that might be what you end up having.
Yeah, could be a spot for Jay White right now. He's not doing much of anything else.
No.
All right. So we'll move on now to one of the bigger matches of the evening. I was a little surprised to see the promo come up for this so early on. Dashed my hopes of it being the main event, but it is, of course, Timeless Toni Storm defending her AEW Women's World Championship against Mariah May in a Hollywood ending match, which was described by commentary as no disqualifications, no countouts, falls count anywhere, so essentially a no holds barred brawl. Toni Storm
really missed the opportunity to bring back the one and done Hollywood backlot brawl stipulation from Goldust and Roddy Piper at WrestleMania. Really missed that opportunity here.
Would you have had Dustin Rhodes be the special guest referee?
I certainly would have had him make some sort of pithy comment, in passing backstage while he's passing Toni Storm in the halls or something like that. Absolutely.
Funny. That would be good.
So Toni Storm winning this one in 12 minutes, 54 seconds to retain the AEW Women's World Championship. She does so after these two brawl up to the top of the stage. This is Mariah May sees that Toni has retrieved the shoe, the shoe, of course, made famous from Mariah's turn at the beginning of this long running angle. Toni is able to jam the heel of the shoe into May's head over and over and over again. And then she puts her through a Hollywood ending table with a Storm Zero and collapses over May's bloody body for a 3 count. This was a bloody mess from the outset. Mariah May busted Toni open within just a couple of minutes of this thing starting. And there's a moment where Tony gets on offense for the first time in the match, and she wipes the blood from her eyes because it is just pouring down her face.
It was.
And she verbally reacted, and I was trying to determine, like, did she blade outside and cut herself too deep and was like, oh God, what did I do? Because there's just so much blood pouring. That's what I surmised from the moment. But regardless of what the intent was, it worked within the story of the match because she's just exasperated with all of this blood and wiping it from her eyes. These two pull out all the stops. There is ice, like like metal buckets filled with ice and with broken shards of glass from champagne bottles that they tape to their wrists and punch each other bloody with. There's pile drivers on broken glass. There is Storm Zeros on broken glass. There's Maydays on broken glass, off the top rope. Whatever you can think of in terms of bloody chaos, these two went for it. I was shocked by the brevity of this one. I thought that given how high stakes this feud has been, that these two would have gone longer. But I also understand that the goal here was clearly just outright carnage right out of the gate, and they are going to basically bleed themselves into submission. And that's essentially what they did here. May and Storm lost so much blood that it would have been hard to imagine this going much longer than 13 minutes. I thought this was a fitting end to what has been one of the best stories that AEW has ever told in company history. Certainly the most important feud that the women have ever had in AEW. Mariah May elevated Toni Storm both in the ring and as a character. I thought that, the vast majority of what these two did together was very, very high end. Even when Storm's character fell too far into comedy for my liking, they more often than not brought it back into something serious. I don't always love the overwhelming amount of gore that AEW sometimes goes to, but sometimes I think there's matches that are deserving of that level of violence. And this one I thought rose to that level. Greg, what did you think?
Just echoing a lot of what you said, Brandon. I thought this was completely on point as a finish to this feud. I thought the visuals, the callbacks, everything worked for me. There was one overhead shot when Toni Storm was lying on the mat and she was bloody from head to toe. Mm-hmm. And you could tell, and to your point about the match only going 13 minutes, absolutely. If it had gone 20, it would not have been believable that mm-hmm. these two wrestlers would have survived this level of violence to that point. Look, the storyline was not perfect. We can nitpick here and there, but from start to finish, overall, I think it was one of, as you said, the strongest storylines that AEW has told. Certainly for the women, the strongest long-term women's story that has been told. It elevated Toni Storm. She is now a bigger star than she was going in. Kind of lost in the shuffle there for a little bit when she first started in AEW, and Mariah May now coming out of this a huge star. So that's what you hope when you engage in a long-term storyline to this degree. Your goal is to get both wrestlers more over by the end of it than they were going in, and that's absolutely what happened with this storyline. So I think there is some concern about what happens to Mariah May now, since she has only been an AEW wrestler in the context of this Toni Storm storyline. And what does it look like when she's no longer in that gravitational pull? Can she be as effective as a character outside of that storyline? So I think that remains to be seen. But absolutely, in terms of a fitting ending from a level of violence, this was what what the doctor ordered, I think, for this.
If there's a path for, in the not too distant future, for May to become a babyface, then I think that she is the type of character that you commit to a long-term feud with Mercedes Monae. I think that, that would be a really fascinating feud for the TBS title. If that's a direction that they want to go. I'm not necessarily advocating for it because I think May is great as a heel and has done really good work in that role. But if they find that they're having a hard time utilizing her to the extent at which I think they should, then that's certainly a consideration that they could take, because I do think that she is worth spending a lot of TV time on. I think she's proven herself during the course of this feud that she's someone that they can really, really build either division.
She's got that star quality that not everybody has.
For sure. And she's got the in-ring prowess too. I mean, she's had very good matches with Tony and with others. So I think that I think it's definitely something that they'll want to consider long term. Sean, thoughts on this match?
So with what you said about Tony and Mariah just as a whole, I mean, I'm obviously with you guys. As much as I can nitpick Tony's character and how much I might not think it's good for a character like that to have a title, to hold a title, because it doesn't feel as serious all the time. And I like my champions to be serious. I mean, you can have a comedy spot here or there, very minute stuff, but it was kind of interesting for me to see that. But then obviously the storyline that they've had has been really fun in so many different ways. And I have loved what Tony has done in AEW. I'm a Tony fan as much as anybody. And so the story's been the best long-term story they've pretty much ever told. It's been a lot of fun. My only, I guess, argument, you guys were saying, and I understand where you're coming from, like, oh, if this match goes more than 12 minutes, we've seen Hangman and Swerve have way more gory matches than that, and they went 30 minutes. I mean, you can, the problem with that, the only argument I would go against that is when you're having a match like that is that gory and you're trying to sell, like, to me, you have to sell some of that stuff. You can't just go from, oh, I'm going to drop you on shard glass, to you're going to get up a minute later and just start doing the same stuff you were doing. Like, that's, to me, that's more no selling that I don't like. Like, I don't think in a gory match like that, you should be just going from spot to spot to spot to spot in really, really quick amounts of time. I don't think that's good. I understand the point they were making, which you said, and it's fair that, oh, they're bleeding so much they can't go anymore. But I don't know. I think you could go another.
I think one of the differences, the blood started almost immediately in this match.
It did.
Yeah. For some of the other matches, it takes a while to get there, and you get a little bit of a normal match up until that point. Whereas for this, right out of the gate, they went right to the violence straight away, and I think that might be a slight difference from some of the matches you may be talking about.
No, and that's fair, but I still think moving from spot to spot after you're bleeding and you're getting cut up and you're falling on glass, you shouldn't be getting up in a minute and just doing another move. You just shouldn't. I mean, that to me is a little bit of the only nitpick I would have about this. Other than that, I thought it was really, really well done. I mean, it was a fun match. I enjoyed a lot of it. That's the one thing that kind of bothered me. I just kind of felt they kept moving. And that's what AEW, with some of the no selling, they don't sell as much as I'd like them to. And that's kind of a little bit of an issue. But again, the Hollywood ending was so fun. The Storm Zero on the table was a really cool ending. And I thought they got to where they needed to go. But I'm worried about Mariah in the sense of, I think she's a big star. But when she wasn't wrestling Tony, that middle part when Tony was gone and before she came back, Mariah was just cold, felt so cold. And I'm really worried that now that she's away from Tony, I don't know if Tony can book it right. I hope he can, because she is a big star and she needs something good to move on from. But I'm a little nervous about that too.
Yeah, I think that there is definitely concern to be raised with Mariah away from Tony. I do think that the one area that gives me some pause and hope going forward is just that I think when May was working with other challengers, there was just this baked in understanding that we're all just waiting for Tony Storm to show up. Like, we know that that's coming,
Right.
and none of this other stuff means anything because it's all leading to Toni Storm. So I think that will, not having that hanging over her head, will improve the situation overall.
Yeah, I did want to point out, because Goodfella in the chat said, didn't we kind of see that during her title reign where she was not associated with, Toni Storm had gone off and retired, and Mariah was defending her title. And as you said, there was that cloud of Toni Storm still hanging over. But also, Mariah May as champion without Toni Storm was not exactly her most memorable time in AEW. And I think that's part of where that concern comes from is, okay, if you want to make the argument that we've kind of seen it, we've seen it, and it wasn't all that impressive. So hopefully she can overcome that now that she's away from Toni Storm and moves on completely from this storyline.
Yeah, for sure. The other thing, Sean, that you've raised, I think the no selling thing, it's speaking to a larger
issue,
presence within AEW as a whole, where I think you basically have to stipulate to the notion that this is how they book. This is what you're going to get out of them. I don't foresee that changing in any meaningful way. So we're down to our final two matches here, since we've already talked about the main event. We have Konosuke Takeshita with Don Callis taking on Kenny Omega for the AEW International Championship. Kenny Omega, a triumphant victory here, getting a major pay-per-view win after his battle with diverticulitis. He wins the international title in just under 29 minutes after a whole bunch of interference from Callis. Kenny hits the V-trigger and is about to set up for the One-Winged Angel when Callis grabs Takeshita's leg to prevent Kenny from pulling him in for the finish. That leads to a spot where they basically are rolling each other up. Kenny kicks Callis's hand away. They're rolling each other up, and Kenny catches Takeshita in a crucifix leverage pin and scores a 3 count. This was, I thought, a really good match from a storytelling logistical perspective. It wasn't the normal bombastic style of hard-hitting wrestling that we see out of Takeshita. And I thought that was good to get him into a different gear here against Kenny Omega, who is, of course, incredible, but is having to find his footing doing some things a little bit differently coming off of the significant injury. This was the first big epic style main event level match for Omega in AEW since returning. And I thought it was interesting that they played so heavily into the diverticulitis and the issue that he may still be having with his abdomen. Takeshita was just adamant about attacking that body part all throughout the match. Kenny was selling it extensively throughout the match, could not hit the One-Winged Angel at all during the course of the match. Tried it a couple of times earlier and collapsed under his own weight, could not get Takeshita up in the air, and then they didn't go to it in the finish. They went with a roll-up finish. AEW is not always great about the selling of injuries during the course of the match. The no selling, Sean, as you just put it and brought up in the last match, there wasn't a lot of that here. I mean, they did some of the typical no selling of major, knee strikes and that sort of stuff, the stuff that you're always going to see out of big AEW matches. But I thought they told a really, really impressive and logical story built around Kenny's injury. So Kenny wins this one. We have a new international champion. There's a big celebration after. It's the one moment tonight where they really let a victory breathe afterward. I thought that was good to give Kenny that moment. Sean, I'll throw to you first. What did you think of this one?
I thought it was, for Omega's first, singles match in AEW, like the big one, since he's been back. I thought it was really good. I did like the story they were telling with the stomach and them going back, and Takeshita going back to that repeatedly. I did like that. I didn't love the callous interference that everyone. I'm like, I don't know. I wish they would kind of get away from that. I know he's a heel. I know it's what he's supposed to do, and I try to get that in my head as I'm watching. Like, oh, there's going to be some interference here and there, but it kind of was like, Takeshita doesn't really need that. I wish they would kind of get away from that. The table spot when he hit his stomach on the table, that was a cool spot. I did enjoy that.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if I loved Omega kicking out at one point. I was like, I don't know. That's kind of where I'm talking about the no selling. He just gets right back up, and it's like, oh my gosh. And to me, unless they're and the story they were telling, like you said, which I'm glad you brought it up, is we couldn't do the one-winged angel, so he just ended up they were doing the roll-ups, and he's just going to roll them up for the win. Unless they're going back to this, I don't like roll-up victories. I just don't. I want Omega to go over strong. Like, it's his first singles match in AEW. Let's go over strong. But they could be going back to it. They could say, hey, Takeshi's going to get a rematch. But at the same time, my problem with that is really don't want Takeshita losing again. I really don't. I think Takeshita is so good and so valuable to this company. I think they need to go pretty strong with him. But I mean, the roll-up was fine for the story they told. I just don't love roll-up finishes in general, especially in title matches, unless you're going back to it again. So I hope they do it, because unless that just felt kind of flat to me. But I thought the match was really, really well done. I thought they told a good story in the match.
Yeah, it's strange. AEW used to be a company who almost never went to rematches. You would see a full change in card from month to month, pay-per-view to pay-per-view, and more recently, as they've added these extra pay-per-views, they've relied more heavily on multi-month feuds and
Right.
have gotten really comfortable with trilogies of matches in a lot of cases.
Overdone.
Yeah, in some respects for sure. I wouldn't be surprised to see them go back to this. I think I'm generally with you on roll-up finishes, but I liked so much that they avoided the one-winged angel here because of the injury that I was okay with that. Greg, where do you land on that and the match?
No, I agree with you, Brandon. I think, Kenny, you have to remember, comes from that New Japan mentality where when guys come back from injury, sometimes they'll lose matches when they come back, just because in theory, you're still trying to build up your stamina. You still may be feeling the effects of the injury, still trying to work into shape, and maybe aren't 100% yet. So, the roll-up could explain that, but also, as you said, if he couldn't hit his finisher, it makes sense after all the wear and tear that he faced in this match, the focus that Takeshita had on his midsection, a roll-up finish, sort of makes sense in that context. So context is always important when you look at this kind of stuff. And yes, you can kind of say, I don't like roll-up finishes, but when you look at all the things that kind of led to that, it does make it more acceptable, I think, than using it to give the loser an out, which is unfortunately, Sean, and I think that's probably why you're so averse to that, is because we're a generation that was built on roll-up finishes based off distractions, roll-up finishes to give the loser an out, that they weren't beaten, cleanly, or they weren't beaten and put out. It was just kind of a fluke, but this didn't feel like that to me. This felt like, because of the toll that Takeshita's focus on his midsection took, this is the only way Omega could win. I mean, he had to do it this way. I watched the Gabe Kidd versus Kenny Omega match from New Japan, Omega's actual first singles match back, and a lot of it was the same. It was working on the stomach, working on the area that would have suffered the most from the diverticulitis. And I just think to myself, like, if this was real, every match that Kenny Omega has, his opponent is going to work on the midsection. Yep. And I'm thinking, you can't tell that same story in every match like that. You got to tell different stories. So I am curious as to how much of a focus that is going to be for Omega's opponents moving forward. And who knows, he may not wrestle a lot of singles matches. He may, so 2 months from now when he wrestles his next singles match, maybe he'll feel fresh again. But I do wonder how they deal with that situation. But yeah, Omega and Takeshita I thought was really good. I don't have much to say outside of that and some of the things we brought up with the finish and the body work and everything like that. And I thought it was really well done. Even the Don Callis stuff. I mean, he's such a weasel. Like, the punching, and then he hurts his hand and his, I love that. Like he's such a weasel, and he comes off as so, incredibly impotent as a physical presence that is just so funny. And I really appreciate that.
And then they went back to the injured hand when Kenny kicked it off the rope too, which I thought was a nice touch.
Yes, the payoff in a way. So, the other thing before we move on, and I guess I could talk about the next match too. Maybe it'll segue us into the next match. But we often talk at these shows about the heel dominance that happens on AEW pay-per-views. And so I got to give Tony Khan his due here, because he put 4 top baby faces over here: Will Osprey, Kenny Omega, Hangman Adam Page, and Swerve Strickland. So I think if we criticize him for too many heels getting victories, I think we got to applaud him when he puts baby faces over at the right time. And I thought these were all the right finishes too. I thought they went over the right way in these matches.
Yeah, it was a really good feel-good moment too for Omega. You could feel the weight of this victory, and I thought that they did a good job selling it, both in terms of letting the camera hang on Omega for a while as he left the ring and collected his thoughts and grabbed the international title and looked down at it. Commentary was very heavy on the fact that, hey, for a while there, they truly did not know if Kenny Omega would ever wrestle again. And Taz, I think Taz just said straight up, that's a shoot. Like they just didn't know. I mean, it was really in question for a while, because of course diverticulitis is a very serious medical issue. Mm-hmm. So I thought that they handled that well on a night where, and in a company where they so often are so quick to move on to the next thing, because there's so much they're trying to cram into their 4-hour allotment. They made time to carve out a little bit of extra time to let Kenny's big win breathe and to let him celebrate, gave him some fireworks. I just thought that was a nice touch.
Yeah. Real quick, I wanted to say too, the only thing I didn't like about when he did the roll up, which was, again, I guess it was fine, but I don't know, the crowd just wasn't super into it. Like they just, they cheered it. They were positive to it, but it wasn't an overwhelming, like, thunderous reaction. Because even when they went back to him at the end, just holding, like, the fans were just ready for the next thing. They just didn't feel like they were truly behind him. And that's what I didn't like about those kind of finishes. When you have a fun finish, like we'll get to with the next match, it's like you can have your ins and outs of whatever during the matches, but like the fans, it kind of just felt a little more flat, I guess, is where I'm kind of coming from. Like it didn't feel like a thunderous reaction when he won the title, which I think they were wanting to get from it.
Yeah, I mean, there's a conditioning too with AEW, I think, for people to just immediately move on to the next thing, because that's what they typically do. And I wonder if there was some people who were thinking, because they were hanging so long, that there was going to be some sort of swerve, that somebody was going to attack Kenny or something. So there was a little bit of surprise when they didn't get that. But Sean, you kind of alluded to it already. The last match that we will talk about here, since we've already covered the main event at the start of the show, this was certainly the main event in terms of excitement at the end of the night, for sure. Will Osprey facing Kyle Fletcher in the final match of their trilogy of matches that have taken place over the course of the last 3 pay-per-views. This one occurring inside a steel cage. Will Osprey, your winner in just under 29 minutes. He finally gets a win over his former friend Kyle Fletcher to close out this feud. This was a bloody, bloody mess. If you thought that the women's world title match earlier was bloody, it was only going to go downhill from there in terms of spillage in the ring. By the end of this thing, Osprey's primarily white tights were stained red from, foot to waist. Mm-hmm. Fletcher was covered from head to toe. The mat was soaked through at a level I don't recall seeing in many instances. There were thumbtacks all over the place. The turnbuckles were torn apart. These two just beat the living hell out of each other for nearly 30 minutes. Finish comes after they both are climbing to the top of the cage. Basically, Fletcher has had enough. He is trying to escape. A side note, you could not win this match by escape. It was pinfall or submission only. Fletcher is trying to escape Osprey's grasp. Osprey follows him to the top of the cage with a screwdriver that Fletcher had brandished earlier in the match. They battle seated on top of the cage. Osprey hits Fletcher with the screwdriver, finally getting some measure of revenge for the number of attacks on Osprey with the screwdriver over the last several months. Then there's a long setup to an executed Spanish fly off the top of the cage, which looked incredibly dangerous and wasn't terribly scary. So much so, in fact, that the normally rabid crowd was sort of like waiting with bated breath to see how these two were going to land safely on the mat. Thankfully, they did. At that point, Osprey is awaiting Fletcher to stand in the corner. Fletcher is screaming, "I hate you, I hate you, I effing hate you," over and over at Osprey. It's kind of like the Shawn Michaels Ric Flair spot that wrestling has used many times since then, where the wrestler knows that their end is near and they are welcoming the finish. Osprey hits the hidden blade and then the Tiger Driver 91 to finally pin Fletcher. Greg, I'll throw to you first here.
Mark Davis also interfered at one point at the behest of Don Callis, and I just want to stipulate right away that I hate the idea of wrestlers breaking into cages. Since that it's used way too much, so I did not like it here. The only solace that I take from that is that it didn't really have a great effect on the match or on the finish, I guess I should say. It was done and over with probably, and then 10 more minutes of match happened. So at least it didn't lead directly to the finish. So I'll say that. But
other than introducing a bunch of weapons.
It did introduce the weapons that were eventually used. Yes. So I thought this was really dramatic, really strong match. The blood and the gore is always something that I get a little, I don't love the overuse of it or the use of it to an extreme degree, the way that we saw here with Osprey and Fletcher, but memorable, yes. And I think maybe that's the big takeaway from this is Osprey is another guy, sort of like Strickland, where fans are just shouting from the rooftops that he's taking too many losses and that he's not treated like the superstar and the top guy that he should be treated like by AEW booking. And so having a memorable win over Kyle Fletcher, his former best friend here in this bloody battle, I think will go a long way into resetting that. Brandon, I think you hit on the high notes here. It was just, it's the Osprey match where there's one or two spots where you just wish he didn't do, even if he came out healthy, which I'm not 100% sure based on Tony Khan's comments at the presser where he said some guys are banged up coming out of the show. I'm assuming Will Ospreay is one of them. But a couple moves in his matches that you wish someone would talk him out of effectively. But other than that, just a really strong match, memorable not only for Osprey, but also for Fletcher. I mean, he's a guy who has absolutely taken the ball and run with it the last several months. And even though he loses here, I think he's done enough to where his star is still on the rise.
Yeah, Osprey had a heavy limp to the back after celebrating, and I don't know if that was just him selling or if that was legitimate. It looked pronounced enough that it felt legitimate, but I'm not sure. The Spanish fly spot off the top, Osprey landed awkwardly on his side rather than flat on his stomach, and the way that he came down, it almost looked like he was already compensating on the way down for something else that was ailing him. So I'm not sure, what his status is coming out of it, but I just want to add a point to what you said, Greg, regarding the gore. For anyone who didn't see this pay-per-view and is listening to us prior to watching it, or is going to go back and watch it, it's worth noting like the level of blood in this and the Mariah May and Toni Storm match was high up there in terms of what we've seen AEW present.
Viewer discretion is advised.
Yes.
Yeah, this wasn't like I have a cut on my forehead or over my eye. This was Will Osprey and Toni Storm pouring blood out of their face. There was a moment in this match where Osprey was down on his knees, face toward the canvas, and there was an actual drip of blood pouring into a pool on the mat of Osprey's blood. So this was gory. And gory even by the standards that AEW has previously set. So just want to lay that out there. I thought that you could absolutely make an argument that they went too far in this one, but I also would totally understand the people who thought that this was the what they needed to do for where they were at in this feud to close this out, the level of hatred that these two had for each other. It made sense. I really, really enjoyed this. I thought it was another masterclass from Osprey, but would I have taken some slight editing? Yeah. I think that I probably would have voted for that if I were in the room. Sean, what were your thoughts here?
So yeah, I have a lot of thoughts in the sense of I'm a Will, from what I've seen of Osprey. Again, I didn't see him in New Japan. I don't get to watch New Japan. I don't have time with my schedule. But I love what I've seen from Will. I do. I think I think he could be the biggest star in the company, hands down, no doubt about it. World champion, all those things.
I pound the table every month. Be in the Will Osprey business.
Yep, exactly. He's now, again, a lot of no selling, and I'm not a fan of that in general, but that's what AEW is. I'm trying to learn that that's what they do most of the time, and I'm trying to get used to that style. The match, even though I don't like those kind of matches, the gore and the blood and all those things, I don't need screwdrivers for a long time. I know it was a no holds barred. It was a steel cage. Anything goes. I equipped all that, but just the screwdriver is just dumb in general. They don't need to go to that route. I just thought it's too much. The Davis stuff was really dumb. I didn't like any of that. That was dumb. But I thought the story they did tell for that feud which was a blood feud. That's what it was. That's the kind of match they need to have at that point. You're going to go all out. You're going to give everything you have. I wouldn't have done the Spanish Fly either. I hope Will's okay. I really do. If he's hurt because of this, that's a shame, because I just think he's doing some really good work right now. And I'm getting warmed up with Kyle the more I see him wrestle and the way I see him carry himself with his promos. I do think he's getting a lot more comfortable in that role. And I still think he should have won the Continental Classic and been the Continental Champion, but he wasn't, and he's lost the last few big matches he's had to Osprey. But I still like where he's at, and I still think there is a lot of upward trajectory for him, and that's promising. So I did like the match. I did think the story they told was really well done. I like I don't curse, but the end of the feud was perfect. Him saying, "I hate you, F you, go, I hate F you, whatever." And then he hits the hidden blade and the tiger driver. I did think that was a really good ending to the match. I thought it told a really fun story. So it was good for what it was. It was too much for me personally. I don't love those kind of matches, but it fit here for what they were doing.
Yeah, I would reiterate again, just now that this is in the rear view for Osprey, I know that Swerve is next on the list for John Moxley, but I would, if I'm Tony Khan, I would be sitting down and mapping out the next 6 to 8 months for Will Osprey and figuring out how you're going to get him at the top of your card and in your main events, because I think it's I think it's high time that he is there. I contend, as I said here when we started, Sean, I pound the table for it every month. Be in the Will Osprey business. I just think that he is he is your guy, perhaps even more so than Swerve Strickland. And I think very, very highly of Swerve, and think he belongs in the main event as well. I just think that Osprey is a guy that you can really build this company around and help elevate the company as a whole to a different level. One note from Goodfella in the chat. He said Osprey grabbed his leg after hitting the ropes, and I had forgotten about that. I'm glad that you brought it up. He towards the beginning of the match, Osprey went for a handspring back elbow off the ropes, as he often does, and his ankle collided with the wall of the cage. And the announcer sold that really heavily, wondering, had he hurt his Achilles or something similar.
Yes.
And I wonder, I didn't think much of it during the course of the match because Osprey worked the match fine. But where he was favoring his ankle so heavily later on, I do wonder if maybe he actually hurt it in that spot and was maybe, once the adrenaline wore off when the match was over, he was realizing, oh crap, like there's something with my ankle. So hard to say there. I don't want to speculate any further than we already have, but yeah, I mean, Greg, anything you want to add about this match or about Osprey going forward? Kyle Fletcher too, if you think something you want to bring up with him.
No, I wholeheartedly agree with you, Brandon, about AEW being in the Will Osprey business. I just think, and again, when you talk about who dethrones Jon Moxley, certainly you can make the case Swerve Strickland should. I kind of made the case a little earlier that Adam Page has a storyline reason to, but then Will Osprey should be your top guy. And if Jon Moxley is fighting for the soul of AEW and Will Osprey is the guy that you envision being the top babyface of the company for the next, say, 5 years, shouldn't he be the guy to represent the soul of AEW and to finally dethrone Jon Moxley and ideally end the Death Rider threat once and for all? So not saying that's going to happen, but I think a lot of these guys have arguments for that. And we'll see who ultimately ends up winning and beating Moxley. But I absolutely think Will Osprey, and I'll also say, I haven't bought in to the idea that Will Osprey has been incredibly damaged by the losses he's taken over the last few months. I do think he's still in a pretty strong position, and you could go forward with him at any moment as the top babyface in AEW. I don't think any of those losses are really holding him back at this moment.
Yeah, I think they've set themselves up nicely with a lot of different avenues they can take, a lot of different top challengers that could potentially unseat Moxley. And as we talked about at the start of the show, none of us particularly high on that main event. I'm not going to go back into it other than to just say that there are options. It's not like they're staring down a barrel of, they've got to keep this title on Jon Moxley because there aren't guys out there. They have got a plethora and riches of main event level talent that I think can carry the babyface torch for AEW and transition out of this Death Riders main event era that I think has really served in a negative light and worked against the company as a whole when they're doing some good stuff on the undercard and improving the week-to-week TV. There is, of course, going to be plenty to talk about as far as AEW goes in the coming weeks. They have got another pay-per-view in less than a month, which I did not realize until tonight as I was watching Revolution. But Dynasty is scheduled ahead of WrestleMania this year. To take place in Philadelphia on April 6th. So leading up to that, of course, we would invite those of you who aren't already VIP members to join pwtorch VIP for everything AEW and WWE and beyond. You can see the link there on your screen if you are watching on YouTube, pwtorch.com/GoVIP for those of you who are listening in audio form later on. That allows you, of course, to get ad-free versions of all of your favorite PW Torch podcasts on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Android apps. You can also stream right from the VIP site. It gets you so many cool things, including VIP only podcasts, including the pay-per-view and PLE roundtables, which I know that Wade and company were recording when we went live on the air tonight. So that is probably already waiting for you in the VIP archives on the Torch site or wherever you get your podcasts. There's a weekly PDF newsletter, tons and tons of back issues, and an ad-free version of the site as well. Where you may have seen my report for pwtorch tonight, as well as a link to call into this show. You also get, podcasts including The Fix with Todd Martin, everything with Rich Fan, the post, as I mentioned, the post-event roundtable podcast, and Greg Parks Out Loud, the show of my co-host tonight, Greg. That is a perfect segue to let you go ahead and plug what you do here for the Torch.
Yeah, I show up every once in a while on these episodes whenever I can.
More than every once in a while. I mean, come on.
Okay. If you say so.
Pretty regularly. Let's
go semi-regularly. Okay. Let's cut it in half. Okay. I also join Wade Keller every once in a while on the flagship. I was on not this past week, but the week before. Talking about WWE's pay-per-view and, talking a little bit about AEW, and have Greg Parks Out Loud, my VIP audio show, where I read my full-page column that appears every week in the Torch newsletter out loud with some added bonus content there. And, of course, as I said, you can check out my full-page column every week in the Torch newsletter on a different topic every week. And there's one other thing, Parks' Take on pwtorch.com. Every week I write a shorter version of my column, I guess, for pwtorch.com, a Parks' Take on a subject, oftentimes a little bit more current event style than my full-page column necessarily is. So make sure to check all that out and more.
Cool. And Sean, go ahead and plug your socials if you'd like. And a reminder for those of you who are VIP members, we didn't have any live callers tonight, but typically we have quite a few. Sean counts as a special VIP caller since we brought him in for a roundtable style here. But Sean, go ahead and plug your socials if you want.
Yeah, you can find me on Exit. My full name, SEANPLICHTA. Find me over at Blue Sky as well. The same name, .bluesky.social. I did want to say, I know we didn't really say thumbs up, but it was a thumbs up show for me. I mean, I had little nitpicks, things I didn't like for sure, but overall, I still thought it was a really good show. It was enjoyed, and I enjoyed it all the way around. And I thank you guys for. Oh, one thing about the main event that we didn't bring up, and I think AEW should do better about this, is stop making the refs look like idiots. Don't make Bryce look like an idiot when he's sitting there holding the chair outside the ring. Like,
yeah, it was a lot.
I just didn't like that. I thought that we have enough nitpicks. That was one I really wish they would stop making the refs look bad. I just don't think we need that. But Greg, thank you for letting me get in with you and just talk wrestling with you guys. I mean, I've been a VIP member again for quite a long time now, and just for Wade for giving me the platform and you guys to let me be on with you. It's always a blast, and I really enjoy it. And thanks for having me on again. It was a lot of fun.
Yeah, for sure. And as for me, you can find my reports on both the free and VIP versions of the PW Torch website. The VIP side, of course, ad-free and with a link to participate in these post shows. If you would like to do that in the future, I, of course, provide detailed coverage of all AEW pay-per-views and WWE premium live events. I also host the special edition Wrestling Night in America shows after those pay-per-views and PLEs. And you can also catch me occasionally as a co-host with Wade Keller on the Wade Keller Pro Wrestling post shows. Thanks again so much to our VIP members in the chat who contributed tonight. Thanks to Sean for joining us for this roundtable. And, of course, my co-host, Greg Parks. Hope you enjoyed Revolution and our post-show coverage. And that will do it for us. We'll see you next time on Wrestling Night in America.